Hey everybody, this is Eric Mueller, the host of The Eric Mueller Show. You're tuned in to the podcast that explores what makes any successful person's inner clock tick by unlocking the most impactful tools within their success portfolios. I'm joined today by Jason Byer, the Marketing and Partnerships Manager at Crowdspring, an online design and branding platform. Jason is an expert in finding overlooked visual branding mistakes that hinder your company's growth. In this episode, you'll learn how a visual brand identity can be a substantial competitive advantage, or it can hold you and your company back. Let's head on over to the interview. Jason Byer, welcome to the Eric Mueller Show. I am so excited to have you on today.
Hey, thanks, Eric. I'm excited to be here.
Man, now, Jason, before we dive deep into your expertise on creating strong visual brand identity, I want to know what makes up your success portfolio. So if you're listening to the show and you're new, let me give you just a quick piece of background. So think of it as an investment portfolio. That's your compilation of investments that lay the foundation for your financial goals. Here on the Eric Mueller Show, I really want to discover how successful people like Jason invest in themselves and build the foundation for that success. So Jason, start us off. What are some skills or habits and traits, mindsets or attributes that make up your success portfolio?
Sure, Eric. No, it's a great question. I like the way you frame it with the portfolio, right? Because there's not one way to be successful. It's a little bit of everything. And you might find that, one thing that you thought was helping you is no longer serving you, as you grow in your career and you become a little bit wiser. I think it's important for us to realize that, kind of using like an Oprah mantra to forgive yourself, for your past, your past decisions, right? We want to make sure as we're growing in our careers that we're making adjustments. I think the foundation, and this happened a couple years ago, was reading the book Why We Sleep by Matthew Walker. Did you read this one?
I have not read this one. I did see it on your LinkedIn, though.
Yeah, so he's a neuroscientist. Really fascinating book, and it's the top book that I tend to recommend because it's the one that I've been able to implement so many hours out of every single day, right? Because I'm literally taking the wisdom from this book and applying it to my life 8 hours every single day, right? Or at least that's what I'm trying for. And I think this is the foundation. The studies have shown, Eric Huberman's another great resource that talks a lot about sleep and the science behind it. But we're talking about something that if you don't get this element, you are starting off, on a two-legged stool, right? You're just starting the day. No matter what you do after you wake up, it's already, just at a deficit. You're already underperforming compared to some of your peers that have this, right? There's just a tremendous amount of health benefits and just the feeling of just being energized, right, to start your day and to get accomplished. And this is tough when we're in a job that maybe we don't quite enjoy and we're trying to break out of that, or we're trying to climb through our career or to learn. We need that energy, right? And the best way to get that is through sleep. And so Matthew Walker's book, some of the stuff from Andrew Huberman has been huge. We don't have to get into a lot of the parts of the book. Is an easy read. But I'd say this is kind of that foundation. If you don't have this, it's very difficult to operate. And in that book, they get into, things like caffeine, when to consume it, what's your bedtime based on kind of your age, what's the proper way to get to sleep, the effects of alcohol and food and your diet on sleep. So it's pretty comprehensive, but also a fairly easy read. I think this is why it made such a big splash. Do you want me to go through with just kind of a couple items here, and we can pull back if you want on each one?
Yeah, absolutely.
So I think the next one is to remain curious, right? This is something that for me has been maybe a little bit more natural. I don't think I was as curious during college when, I was assigned things that I needed to learn. But post-college and certainly pre-college, just being naturally curious. I think this probably is easier for some people than others. It probably comes a little bit more natural based on the environment you were raised. But I think it's something we can learn, right? I think just by trying to ask every day, why? why is this the way it is? And being just a little bit curious for that answer, and then going to seek that answer out. I think one thing great about YouTube and podcasts is it's entertaining now to seek out that answer. You don't have to go to an encyclopedia, right? It is kind of fun to learn something on YouTube that you had really no interest in prior to seeing that video. My feed is just this collection of stuff that I didn't know I was interested in, but YouTube knows me better than myself, and so I go down that rabbit hole. So being curious and fostering this curiosity, it's good for a couple reasons. One, it's great if you want to go the entrepreneurial route, because you're going to start asking this question within, why is this process done this way? Why hasn't somebody fixed it? It's also great if you want to stay within the confines of a job. Why is this process working this way, and how can we optimize it? How can we fix it? Why am I not advancing? You can start uncovering it. So being curious is very important. And the last thing I'll say is to challenge yourself, or at least this works for me, is to challenge myself with big goals that take a little while to uncover, to realize. And that process, that journey, two things happen. One, it's not a 10-year process. It's not something that, I'm trying to work towards for, a decade from now that just seems unattainable. These are things that might take a year, 2 years, right? So much more attainable. They have a deadline, and you're able to reach that deadline, decide, do I want to push forward or do something different? I'll give you a couple examples. A few years ago, I did a full Ironman, right? So what's that? 2.5 mile open water swim, 112 mile bike, and then a marathon after that, all done, in a single stretch. That took a lot of training, right? And I knew I wasn't trying to become a professional athlete at this. It was more of a mental. I wanted to say, I grew up watching this happen in Hawaii. I wanted to do it myself. And so, this was a mental challenge. And so there's a clear end. I had to learn a lot along the way about biking and running and fitness and routines and fitting this in with work. And then when that ended, that was it. I knew that, that was going to have some finality. I think a lot of times, we feel like we're giving up if we want to dabble in a hobby or a career and then say, what, this isn't for me. And instead we just stick with it because, there's inertia, and inertia is very difficult to stop. Right after the Ironman, I traveled for a year with my 2 daughters and my wife, worked full time while traveling and trying to save money because I had a mortgage already. And so, that was a challenge in itself. And when that ended, we were like, okay, we're thankful for this opportunity. It was actually sponsored by another company that was compensating me for this trip. And then most recently, I embarked on building a custom house. Took 1.5 years, 2 years of my life, much longer than I had expected. But I learned a ton about building science and all of these processes and how to do this while raising a family and going on. So maybe a long-winded answer, but the goal for this was to say, okay, what are the challenges that I'm setting for myself? And then I get to backfill in with kind of geeking out and learning and pushing myself to get to that goal.
Yeah, I really do love that answer, Jason. The first thing I'll say is that I need to read that book because I know that my sleep is not where it needs to be. Be fully transparent with you there.
None of us is. It's an ongoing optimization.
Oh man, and I can definitely resonate with that curiosity piece and wanting to set those big goals to challenge yourself. Again, I'm preaching to the choir because it's a lot easier said than done. I mean, having a goal that you can accomplish in a year. I think it feels like we live in this day and age of just instant gratification, and
sure,
the millennial generation that I'm a part of is probably infamous for that and wanting to, just have something now. And I feel like it's good to hear you say that that's, part of your portfolio to set those goals that, it's going to make you enjoy that process and understand that, it takes time to build something great.
Well, I think the important thing is I think your audience is, professional, and they're either trying to start companies or they're successful within their own companies and they're growing their career. If you notice, all 3 of those challenges I mentioned have nothing to do with my career. I lead marketing and partnerships at crowdspring.com. We help businesses build strong brands, and we work with a lot of entrepreneurs, a lot of businesses that are trying to rebrand and refocus. And None of those challenges that I just mentioned, are related to that, but they absolutely impacted my ability to succeed at work, right? By challenging yourself, by figuring out how to balance big goals on the side with your work and your family, definitely impacts your ability to work at a much higher pace.
So sleep, curiosity, and big goals build the success portfolio of Jason Byer. What is that inner clock force that keeps you driving towards success, Jason? What really motivates you to get up in the morning and chase the next level?
I guess one way I look at life is that there's no goal, in the sense that we're trying to. I'm curious about how can I be the best I can be, within this day, within this month, within this year, right? When I was building the house, it's never over, right? It's a great symbolism for life, because there's always a project. I mean, even though I'm living there now for the last couple of weeks, there's so many projects we still want to get to, and it's never over. It's just an ongoing process. So you have to enjoy the journey. If you're not enjoying the journey, there's a couple ways to work with that. You either need to change your journey, right? A different career path, different goals, something that you're actually enjoying doing, or you're trying to realize that this is a process. I need to find the enjoyment in the work. In the most of us, think about somebody who's running a business that's not that sexy, right? Cleaning septic tanks or plumbers or things like this, that they have a lot of enjoyment with it, and they have that because they're passionate about some of the ancillary things, maybe the ability to communicate with people and provide a service and help them. But they also get passionate about learning something, right? As we get deeper into the weeds within our careers and within this process, we find enjoyment. We find greater enjoyment by kind of that geeking out, by learning a little bit more.
Yeah, and finally, Jason, the last piece that I'll ask you, really in terms of the core questions of the show to start off, is what is your definition of success, and has it changed for you throughout the course of your life?
Absolutely. I mean, when you think early on, we're just naive. Early in our careers, it's about status, it's about money. As we shift, and I think big events typically have this impact on us, where if they're personal deaths in the family, or losing your job or something like this, is kind of one of those pause moments where you're like, okay, what's going on with my career and with life? I think COVID was kind of that reset button for a lot of people. It's like, okay, wait a minute, what's important? Some people realize that working from home is important. Some people realize that, working from an office and that camaraderie with their teammates was important. For me, success has been about, identifying what's most important. Right now, my family's most important. I've got 2 daughters. I'm not going to have that many summers with them. I'm not going to have that many weekends left before they're out of the house, right? And so I want to maximize that. I still need to provide for them and make money and be successful. I still need to satisfy, my ability or my needs as a human to, perform and be successful and be recognized for my work. But I want to be there for my family. It might sound cliche, but I realize that I don't have that much time with them, that we're on, the clock is ticking. And so for me, success is identifying, at least at that time, what's most important. It's also realizing that there's a season for everything, right? I just came out of the home building season, lasted much longer than I had expected, but everybody around me and the family, we all knew what was expected, and now's the season to kind of refocus, right? Refocus on careers, refocus on the family and what we do and hobbies and things like this. So I think it's an ongoing process, but one thing that's definitely changed for me, we talked about a little bit about it, kind of leading up to this, is, what is success not? And sometimes this might be a little bit easier to identify. And for me, what I've realized as I've gotten older is that success for me is not fame. And I think this is, or notoriety. This is something that, this culture where we've got people making a lot of money, selling newsletter subscriptions and TikTok channels and OnlyFans, right? And they're building these brands around themselves. And the only way to do that is really by notoriety, by being famous, right? In their own right. And I've realized that that's not something I want to chase, right? I'd much rather, success for me is not notoriety or fame. I'd much rather be wealthy and unknown than have that kind of spotlight and attention. And so sometimes thinking about what is success not for you can also be an interesting play on that same question.
Yeah, that certainly helps me. Those of you listening, certainly think back about what Jason just shared about his success portfolio. Think about if there's elements of that you want to put in your own portfolio. And then I just think it's helpful to hear the definition of success each episode, because it really, every time I hear somebody else answer it, my definition shifts a little bit. And so, part of me really kind of seeks notoriety. And now you saying that, I mean, I'm kind of like, really, if given the choice, maybe even wealth or fame, what would you pick? That might be an answer that, maybe one of you listening would not even be able to answer. I don't really think I have an answer for that. Jason, would you, if you had to pick, I mean, you'd pick the wealth over the fame. Do you think if someone picks the opposite?
Yeah, but I don't think there's a wrong answer, right?
Yeah, right.
I mean, look at, I'm a big fan of Joe Rogan because he's able to get into very deep conversations with people. I mean, who would have thought people were going to listen to a 3-hour conversation with one person and then binge watch, every episode going back, years. And so, it's clearly hit a nerve with getting in deep. He's given some great, his notoriety and fame through that platform has really helped a lot of people, and it exposed people to different ideas and thoughts. So I don't think there's anything wrong with it. I think this is a personal choice that you have to make, but you can only, as you kind of mentioned, you kind of have to pick one, and a lot of times on the path that you're going down. And I think just being, this is where you think about like the think weeks that somebody like Steve Jobs would have, or who's Microsoft, Bill Gates,
right.
Where, they take some time, to say, okay, let me think about my career and progress and what's important to me. I think it's important for us to continually think. I don't think there's anything wrong with wanting to be famous. I think it's a great way to make money, especially right now. In a way, I'm kind of jealous because I'm like, man, like, these people are just killing it just because, they're showing their face in a creative way. I'm like, man, I don't think we were that creative, in my teens and 20s as I'm seeing people, today. And so part of me is just kind of a little jealous of them that they're able to pull this off. But I think you want to recognize, what does that success look like for you, and just be comfortable with that, embracing that answer.
Yeah, for sure. Jason, that's so helpful. And it's a perfect segue into the marketing and branding piece of the interview here with you. Is you mentioned the Joe Rogan show, so a big personal brand. Another one that I think of is the Howard Stern show. I mean, my show is self-titled. I mean, obviously, there's a certain aspect to creating a personal brand that someone might desire that to do that in their entrepreneurial path in life. And you've had experience in the marketing and branding facets of the entrepreneurship and business world. What has been the most impressive brand that you've worked with thus far? So you're at Crowdspring. That company's helped over 60,000 entrepreneurs.
Right.
Which one for you? It could be example from Crowdspring or not. What's that answer for you?
So obviously the big names come to mind. We've, like you said, 60,000, a lot of small businesses, a lot of entrepreneurs just getting started. We worked with and I think the important thing to realize is that we've built a process where you see multiple different designs or names for your company or designs for your product packaging. You see multiple different styles made custom just for you, and you're only paying for one of them, for one that you pick. So you might have 3 dozen logos in your project. That's not uncommon, and you're only paying for one. So you get to see a lot of different creativity, and so we've seen the small businesses are a lot of fun to watch because through going through this process, because it's magical seeing this brand become visual, right? Seeing what you've built. And we've rebranded the Dallas Mavericks jerseys. We have created a pasta shape for Barilla pasta. As you know, pasta shapes haven't changed much in centuries, and so they're like, hey, let's do a PR stunt, where we're creating a new pasta shape. And so we worked with them on that. And then, as you mentioned, thousands of small businesses where you've got the first-time author, publishing a book, and they create an awesome book cover. You've got the guitarist who wants to start, a sideline of guitar strings or something that they're building. And so it's fun watching all of them, and you learn a lot of lessons after looking at these, where now I give feedback on brands and help them see the shortcomings, because I think a lot of people are nervous by what is a brand and how do I build a strong one.
Yeah, and that is really like what I was curious about, is what is the difference between a personal brand and a business brand? Is it the same? You think of the Joe Rogan show, as we just mentioned, or Amazon. Obviously, people kind of know Jeff Bezos, but is there a difference if someone's desiring to create one versus the other?
Sure. So the business brand is one that's built on the idea. It's agnostic of some of the people running it. Obviously, Jeff Bezos was closely tied to Amazon, and Steve Jobs with Apple. But you can transition out leadership, and the companies kind of surpass the minds of their founders, right, and become something that even they couldn't have dreamed up when they started in their garage. The influence that they've had. The personal brands, as you mentioned, are like your show. It's titled for you. It's your identity, right? And there's a lot of benefit to this. There's nobody else that can be Eric. There's nobody else that can be Joe Rogan, right? And so when you embrace your specific brand and say, here's what I stand for, here's what I want to do, it feels a little bit more natural, right? And it can feel natural. I think one of the challenges with this is you have to be the face, right? You can't you can't sell this business and exit it very quickly. You might have to transition it over. It may be impossible, right? You look at somebody like Joe Rogan, it's like, he's not going to, turn it over to Jamie and say, okay, Jamie's running the Joe Rogan show now. It wouldn't have that same impact. Now, that's not necessarily why he's doing it. He's a naturally curious person. When he reaches, either the end of that curiosity journey or decides to do something different, he's comfortable with ending that. And so I think you have to know that going into a personal brand, that your exit options might be a little different than running a company, right? Your exit options as a personal brand are to either fold it up, potentially, remove yourself and rebrand to something that has you out of it, or continue operating it. And if it's a brand that, like you're doing podcasts and that you can do for a long time, then there's not necessarily a problem with keeping it. But those are some of the challenges. At its core, what a brand is it's every single interaction that somebody has with you, and it speaks to the same direction. What are you trying to do? So Amazon, is doing great customer service. You have an expectation when you go to Amazon of their customer service, of their return policy, of the speed of their website. If you went to Nike, you'd want to make sure that the product photos weren't blurry or out of focus. You have expectations for what you're seeing with these brands. The same is true as with personal brands, right? We're expecting you to bring a certain level of consistency within the personal brand, a certain amount of professionalism, and I think the important thing to think about is this doesn't mean you don't have to change, right? Again, we keep using the Joe Rogan example, I think, because everybody understands it. It's very clear, but he changes his opinion regularly on things and goes back and forth. He's and that's the nice thing. As personal brands, we're not politicians. We don't have to get labeled as flip-flopping, with our constituents. We're free to be curious. We're free to change our opinions. People make new decisions based on new information all the time, and we should. And so I think just understanding that when we're building that personal brand, we want to lean into, what makes us unique. But part of that means we have to craft it. We have to learn it, right? Because it's too easy to say, oh, I'm going to kind of do the Joe Rogan show, right? I'm going to be curious and hard-hitting, and I'm going to swear, and, I'm just going to, try and copy some of these elements. What works better with personal brands is you want to say, okay, what am I bringing to the table? Most of the time, it needs to be either a unique opinion, that's a little bit controversial or different from the mainstream. It doesn't necessarily have to be controversial, but just an opinion, I guess. And then, or the other aspect is to be incredibly knowledgeable at your craft, right? Joe is not. He is knowledgeable in a lot of different areas. I think one reason why a lot of people resonate with listening to a show is because he asks the questions that normal humans ask. They raise their hand and say, I don't know. What do you mean by that? Most people are scared to ask those questions. I think that's why he's a great interviewer. Tim Ferriss is another great interviewer because he asks these questions and dives deeper into it. But the people he brings on normally have podcasts of their own, and they have podcasts because they are incredibly narrow focused on a niche. They just understand it better than anybody else. And so this is another way to lean into that personal brand. Somebody like Andrew Huberman with the Huberman Lab podcast, where, he just understands he just understands his craft, and his craft happens to be brain science. And so most of us don't know it. And he portrays it in a way that we can understand it. So we've kind of talked about podcasts more because that's the medium we're listening to. But, these personal brands are certainly not relegated just to audio.
Right. And I've often thought that like the visual identity of your brand can be kind of two things. It could be a substantial competitive advantage, or it might hold you back. So kind of looking at it from both sides, Jason, what do you think makes your visual identity an asset versus a liability? And this, personal versus business, not so much that, just the brand as a whole. When you see, the Joe Rogan Experience logo, you associate it with his brand. So what do you think are the qualities of a good brand versus a bad one, more or less?
So you have to constantly be modifying your brand. You have to constantly be looking at your brand and saying, okay, what do I keep? What resonates? And what should I modify? In this example, Joe's kind of the wrong example here because he's a billionaire and he's doing it really for his own personal enjoyment. You can tell he's a naturally curious person and he wants to talk to a lot of unique people. And so, in that way, he doesn't really care, what people necessarily think about his brand and that. But if you look at, I'm trying to think of a couple other examples. If you think about websites you've been to or go back in the Wayback Machine and look at websites from the early 2000s, right? You're just disgusted. It's like, wait a minute. Like, I thought that looked good. Like I purchased from that company, in those years. And we should have, just like we have that type of embarrassment in our careers, we should have a little bit of embarrassment about us 10 years ago, us 15 years ago, us last year. If you don't have that embarrassment, it means you've started too late. It means you've tried to get everything perfect before you launch. And I think the important thing here is just to start moving, right? Start making that momentum if you're trying to build that personal brand or you're trying to start that company. You don't want to have everything perfect. You just want to put the tweet out there. Start writing the LinkedIn post. Start writing the book as a newsletter or as a blog post where 5 people read it, and 4 of those people are your mom that keeps refreshing it, right? So what we want to be embarrassed about the past because it means we took action and we took action early. And so I bring this up now because we should continually be refreshing and looking back at the brand. You mentioned it being a liability rather than an asset. When you start, it's likely a liability because, you started and you tried to save money. You got started and you weren't focused on some of these elements because you were just trying to sell or grow or get famous. What's the Chinese proverb? The best time to plant a tree is 20 years ago. The second best time is today, right? And so we want to get started, but then we need to look back and say, okay, is now the time? Am I at a space where I can start investing in this visual identity? The only way we know that visual identity, we don't create visual identities and brands for our own gratification. We create them so that they resonate with somebody, right? And so we want that brand and that message and that visual to resonate with somebody, that somebody being our customer, that somebody, paying for our content through Substack or Patreon, where they say, okay, I resonate with you and your brand and your message. And the visuals follow from that, right? The visuals should just be a natural extension of that brand voice. When you think about colors, which form a strong role within the visuals, they mean something. Blues mean trust. Red means excitement or danger. Yellow or green, means vitality and and strength. And so there's different forms for these colors. So the steps would be, who am I speaking with? What person is this? What do they resonate with about me and my brand? And then how do I craft that visual so that it is a natural extension from that, right? It's using the appropriate colors. You wouldn't want a company named Serenity that's in orange and red, right? That's an obvious error. So this is one thing that's great, that we built into the CrowdSpring platform, because we realized this is a challenge, right? And so what we did was we said, okay, we're going to work with small business owners who don't understand design and branding. And we're going to say, just tell us the basics about your business and your brand. Tell us who your customers are, what you're trying to do, what sets you apart from your competitors. And then from that, we have great designers that we've trained, and they understand, branding and design, and they're going to give you dozens of different designs to pick from so that you can say, oh, I get it. This is what makes sense, for this brand, and sharing it with your customers to say, okay, does this resonate with you?
Yeah, Jason, do you think the name of the company is just as important as the logo? So you shared a lot of great tips on colors and making sure that your logo and brand resonates with your target audience. But is if someone's creating a company or a personal brand, should they focus more on the name or more on the logo when starting?
Unfortunately, it's both, right? So the name typically precedes the logo, right? So you're naturally going to, focus on the name first and then shift 100% of that energy to the design side, right? You want to have both. Again, we don't want to stress out. We want action. We want to move. And so we don't want to stress out, and be paralyzed with what we're doing. Sometimes it's just best to call the company what it is, what you're doing in the location, and start moving. You can always rebrand later at a later date. If you started the company and you're, just barstools.com, but then you get into sofas and dining room tables later, you rebrand, right? And so we've all seen this happen as consumers. So the name is important. Remember, keep in mind, if you're naming it after yourself, you've got to stay with the company or plan to go through that process later as you're extricating yourself, to kind of rebrand that to bring in additional help. We saw this is a challenge as well. And so we offer custom naming services for products and companies where it follows the same process. We hire a different set of creatives who understand how to name companies and products. And you get dozens of different custom names for your creative brief. You're telling us what the project is. And one thing I think it's important to mention is that we're founded by an intellectual property attorney. And so all of the conversations that you're having are protected, they're confidential, they're private. And so we work with a lot of companies we can't talk about because they trust us for that privacy. And I think that's very important. For entrepreneurs getting started, they worry about somebody, kind of stealing that idea, stealing that identity.
Yeah, and as you're listening, that the show notes is where you go for these unique links and the tidbits that Jason shared. So crowdspring.com, I'll definitely have that in those. Right when you go to the website, you see their name in blue. So right there, it's a trustworthy place, as Jason just taught us. But I also want to ask you, Jason, the design of a brand can influence whether people want to invest time or money into you. So how can we create a brand identity that would make a person that is in our target audience jump at the opportunity to consume our business or content?
We always want to be focusing on our target audience. We don't want to try to be something for everyone. I think this is the challenge with brands, is we want to turn people off. Right? That is the definition of knowing that you're going after a certain group that identifies with the product, right? So Black Rifle Coffee Company, right? A heavy focus on, their amendments and their rights. And they're going to turn people off with that design. They've also built an incredibly huge business around this, right? And so I think that's important to realize, is that you shouldn't be trying to. It's very difficult. It's not that you shouldn't. It's just difficult to try to convince somebody to join your brand when they don't resonate with it, right? It's better to build a brand with the people that are more like you, who identify with what you're putting out there. And so they say, okay, here's the place that I go. And you don't have to have that many people to build what would be considered a successful business. What's the 1,000 True Fans blog post that circled, maybe a decade ago, where, if you have 1,000 people that pay you $100 a year, just made $100,000 a year. That's not many people, 1,000 people. And we can typically think of 1,000 people or find them through groups that, have our same industry and our focus and our desires. It's not, when you break it down like that, it's not that hard. And we can see this in action. We see this with Patreon, with Substack, with OnlyFans. We see, these platforms that have said, okay, provide the content, and people, you're going to resonate with a certain person who's looking for this. So I didn't mean to kind of hijack the question, but I think that's a very important point that we try and that conflicts within us, is that how do I get somebody into my camp? It's better just to talk to the people that are going to resonate with what you're putting out.
Yeah, no, and I appreciate that, Jason, because I'm transparent on this show. I am a work in process as, an entrepreneur and an aspiring, person that can influence others to be excited to chase their dreams.
Well, and so let me interrupt you right there, because that's also a great brand. If people are thinking about like what type of personal brands to build, this ability to build in public. I don't know if you've heard of this term, but it's a popular way where you show your mistakes, you show the process, you show the messiness. When I was building this house, I'm watching so many YouTube channels about how to, build something. And I hate when they edit the video, because they're like, oh, and you just do this, and then they splice it. And then like, oh, that's probably because it wasn't that easy. And it took you 30 minutes to do it. And you wanted to show a nice clean layout. The much better content is when it's just raw. They're just showing you, like, this is what I'm doing. I'm doing it maybe incorrectly. The comments are blowing up with critiques, but people enjoy that. And I think there's a lot of ways to build in public within any industry, right? Focusing on that niche, I think is incredibly important, which is something you're doing.
Does the visual identity of the brand influence how much someone's willing to pay? And this probably, can kind of depend on your target audience and what your services are, and, are they a company that would be willing to invest a lot of money versus,
Sure.
a singular consumer? But do you think like the visual identity of that brand, does that influence how much someone's willing to part with their hard-earned dollars?
Absolutely. And our logo projects start at $300. And so when you think about, the service that you're offering, a lot of times it's just, a couple extra sales, so it's like, do you think you can get 2 or 3 extra sales over the course of using this brand? It's like a no-brainer to say, this is worth testing. It's worth experimenting, because the challenge with bad design is you're up against so many competitors that it's just table stakes. It's just table stakes to have a well thought out design and something that looks clean and it looks professional. The problem with poor branding is it shows you just don't care. It shows that you don't care. This is what the consumer's thinking. Think about when you're purchasing a product and the design just is out of focus, or it doesn't look right, or it's a lot of times with cheap designs, you'll try to over communicate. You'll put too much information within the package. And so, you'll see a logo where they list out kind of all their services and a bunch of different symbols to represent all the services. It looks sloppy. They're trying to overcompensate with a poor design by adding more, and it's not very effective, right? Especially when you shrink that down to an email, or an avatar on social media. I can't even tell what you're doing, and so it signals to the consumer that you just don't care enough about your product. And if you don't care enough about your product or your service, why should I care, right? I'm the one who's giving my money. And if you don't care as the one trying to, receive that and provide a service, there's doubt. And that's what kills businesses, is creating this friction, creating this doubt. We never want somebody, to come to our website or our offer and say, well, am I going to get what they're promising? Do they actually know what they're doing? Design is an easy way to say, this person's professional. I'll check them out. I'll dig a little bit deeper. I'll engage with them. I'll buy this product. I'll see how it works. That's what we're doing with design. And because it starts, so reasonably. It's not a big investment, and it's not a big ask to say that this is going to increase sales by 1 or 2 in order to pay for itself. It's going to do much more than that.
Yeah, and you're investing in something that, is going to pay dividends over the long term. So, a small price now in making sure your logo is correct and delivering the message you're seeking to deliver, that's going to possibly influence whether your business or personal brand even succeeds, or whether or not you want to continue doing it if you don't feel like it's resonating with the people that you're trying to target. So
sure.
Yeah, in the show notes, absolutely, we'll tag the link if you want to work with Jason in that way. If someone wants to reach out to you personally, Jason, do you use any social media, or is email the best way? If someone wants to contact you to learn more, how would you prefer they do that?
Email's the best way, jason@crowdspring.com.
Perfect. Well, Jason, I got one more question for you, and this one's kind of, just one that was on my mind regarding branding. Is there a myth about building a brand that you want to debunk right now, that you think it's common, or one that you've heard people say that you as an expert know that's not true?
Well, I think we kind of teased around it earlier, and it's really to kind of give that permission to start without having the brand fully thought out. You want to get started, and so I think the idea that you need everything in line at the beginning really is a crutch that you're leaning on to delay your work. Right? You're getting started. It's messy. The first episodes, or the first books, or the first podcasts, or the first blog posts, they're going to be messy, and nobody's going to read them, and you're going to look back later and cringe. But you've got to get started. And then the next thing you got to do is start focusing on this brand, right? But you want to make sure that you start with the movement and then start focusing on this brand. If you have the knowledge, obviously it's going to be much more helpful if you can start from the beginning by identifying, who's this audience that I'm trying to reach? Why am I valuable? How am I going to impact their lives? But definitely start moving first, and then reach out to CrowdSpring, and we can help you get started with those visuals.
That's great. Well, Jason Byer, Marketing and Partnerships Manager at CrowdSpring, thank you so much for taking the time to be a guest today, share your knowledge. We'll have people reach out to you, and we look forward to following your journey, sir.
Sounds good, Eric. Thanks so much.